The practice of tattooing and adorning the body with art has existed for thousands of years and has permeated mainstream and popular culture in the modern day. With tattoos being a visible medium, the art form is evident virtually everywhere, in advertising to archaeology, from sports to celebrities and other public figures. Indeed, as Buss and Hodges suggest, tattoos are apparent in the iconography and symbolism of almost every culture on the planet in which tattoos have traditionally held strong cultural significance. However, as globalization continues to drive the expansion and commodification of culture across national borders, the issue of the cultural appropriation of tattoos and the misrepresentation of one's heritage, society, and culture through the medium of tattoos has sparked considerable debate. As such, the following video aims to explore the inherent ownership issues involved with art on a living canvas. Tattoos as collective cultural property and identity, and the examination of the relationship between cultural specificity and tattoo ownership. For the sake of simplicity, this exploration will examine tattoos as part of Maori culture and heritage in Aotearoa, New Zealand, as an extended case study example. As far as notions of ownership go, from a legal standpoint, Bradley explains that as works of art, tattoos fall within the realm of copyright, meaning that tattoos as a product and the act of tattooing as a procedure are both concepts that are inherently governed by intellectual property laws by virtue of their creative elements. However, while simple legal notions of tattoo ownership may be applicable within non-traditionalist westernized nations such as Australia or the United States of America, the legal definition of ownership lacks the nuance required to be suitable amongst other cultures. Tan suggests that whereas copyright regimes begin from the perspective of self-interested individuals and their various properties, the cultural perspective begins instead from a transgenerational assemblage, an ancestral whole whose duration exceeds that of any individual person. This is apparent in the culture of the Maori of New Zealand, for whom tattoos represent something far more significant than skin adorned with artwork. To that end, in the words of Pritchard, to read the tattoo simply as a metaphor for the inscription of culture or society on the body, as an assignment, impression, or shaping of external social and cultural contexts on individuals, is to obscure the complexity of the line the tattoo marks. How then can we examine tattoos through the lens of culture without unwittingly imbuing such concepts with our own outsider notions of culture and property? The answer, Pritchard argues, is that one cannot and should not assume that what counts as belonging in one culture corresponds to belonging in another. Moreover, it could be said that understanding the relationship between cultural specificity and tattoo ownership and identity in the case of Maori culture starts with first understanding the cultural elements present in Maori tattooing. Broadly speaking, Maori tattoos generally adorn the face of the individual, with intricate, monochromatic designs swirling around the cheeks and brows. The designs themselves are of huge cultural significance, with each element symbolizing various societal values, such as a person's rank, marital status, or even one's status at birth. As such, not only are Maori tattoos unique depending on the idiosyncratic attributes of the person on which they appear, but the tattoos themselves are a physical representation of one's identity. However, while these elements typify Maori cultural tattoos, Shand cautions that basing notions of Maori art upon normative definitions of the traditional or the authentic runs the risk of introducing a prescriptive element into Maori art. There is a danger for cultural outsiders to ascribe meaning to tattoo designs under the presumption that their identified cultural value will not change. Tattoos are ultimately art forms and are subject to the effects of cultural evolution and mimetic development, their physical forms appearing on a living canvas with agency and free will, creating somewhat of a secondary meaning for each tattoo. Pritchard echoes such sentiments, arguing that the need to recognize the legitimacy and creativity of indigenous expressions, practices, and beliefs as repositioned, re-articulated, or reformulated within the contemporary, and advocates for the rejection of the strict and limited conditions imposed upon the category Indigenous by preservationists, traditionalists, and conservative scholars of anthropology and history. As such, it is helpful and useful to interpret the concept of tattoos as culture as being an example of a homogeneous entity shared amongst individuals in a systematic manner, as opposed to being a fixed unit of cultural information within Maori society. Given the nuanced nature of culturally significant tattoos, traditional Western legal and legislative approaches to Indigenous notions of property and ownership have garnered considerable criticism. To that end, O'Brien warns that one must be certain that Western understandings of heritage legislation do not exclude the use by Indigenous people of items which, in their view, are part of their life, a sentiment which directly links to that of Maori tattoos. Documenting the multifaceted meaning of tattoos, Buss and Hodges outlined the individual factors lending to the cultural ownership of and a collective attachment to tattoos, for the art form allows for self-empowerment, identification within a group, memorialization, and acts as a message to oneself and a connection to others within cultural circles. While such elements may not constitute ownership by legally oriented Western societal standards, tattoos imbued with rich societal history and meaning are strongly linked with cultural notions of ownership and custodianship. Similarly, Pritchard points to the in-betweenness of tattoos as entities of cultural identity and property, insofar as they are neither fully inside nor outside the body, neither purely one's own nor another's, but rather a kind of split between the individual and the general, the empirical and the structural. From this, it can be surmised that much of the cultural value of tattoos in these collectivist cultures is the sharing of a singular history and heritage and a unique in-betweenness where the tattoos are representative of the sovereignty, resilience, and strength of Maori culture in modernity. As such, it can be argued that specific cultural groups own tattoos significant to their collective culture and heritage, insofar as they reserve the rights and retain the agency over the cultural meaning of the designs and their identity. While the Western legal and copyright definition of ownership is at odds with what an individual recognizes as their collective cultural identity and concept of belonging to a group, the personal significance of a culturally inspired tattoo cannot be underestimated. It could be said that traditional cultural parameters in the modern world have heavily influenced the debate over cultural specificity and tattoo ownership. This will be the case while ever Maori culture in Aotearoa continues to evolve and blend with external influences of other island nations and that of post-European influences. Perhaps the most important part of tattoo ownership does not come down to the legal copyrightable value or cultural aspects of art on a living canvas, but in the importance and value afforded to the canvas itself, the individual who chooses to adorn themselves and identify with the art upon their skin.